Thank you. Nice to be here. Excuse my English accent. We used to be a part of Europe, but we're now somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to try and channel some of the things I'm seeing when I'm out there with the entrepreneurs trying to build the future. And I am taking too many airplanes and was in China a couple of weeks ago. There's lots happening, and I guess the conclusion is the world is never going to move this slowly again. But what does that mean if you're trying to create a business that's going to survive this onslaught of transition? How do you create that sense of innovation? And it partly depends on our own mindset. I mean, how many people here, just indicate with your hands, think that within 10 years there will be flying cars over the streets of Las Vegas? Anybody? Just a couple. Well, the weird thing is, with startups, they're here now. You know, this is just one of a whole bunch of startups already putting flying cars to market. This one's in Eastern Europe, in Slovenia. It's called Aeromobile, but Larry Page has separately invested $100 million in another flying car company. I don't know if this is how you want to commute to work. This is an earlier prototype. But then last week, Airbus starts talking about its own version of the flying car. And take things we think we're familiar with. You know, I think I understand what the drone economy is all about. So we can now, for a couple $100, buy one of these to play with in the park. And then I'm having to revise my own assumptions, and I see a lot, because suddenly, at the Consumer Electronics Show earlier this year, a Chinese company called Ahang releases a new kind of drone that can carry a person. No steering wheel, just a little touch screen, and then you're up in the air.
We have the application designed for EHang 184. After setting up the flight plan with a single click, user can take off on any location, sit, relax, and enjoy the flight.
Would you like an upgrade? So what I love is this is not the future, this is now. Amazon is testing these things, and it affects the culture more generally. Take a tech like drone technology, suddenly there's a whole new games culture. Drone racing. You get the virtual reality glasses on, you have the point of view of what the drone is seeing. And this is suddenly coming from the edges to be a fairly big growing sports event. Or if you don't want to do drone racing, how about drone boarding? This came out of Russia. A couple of kids put on YouTube some videos, and then it becomes a thing. So forget selfies. You know, you now need dronies. There are hundreds of channels like this one on YouTube. Alex Chacon goes around the world with the drone, making him look handsome and just staring up at him. It must be really hard for Alex to get a date because she knows he's going to be paying attention up there. And that's just drones. Think about robotics and automation and how it's going to change your mindset. The first time you were in that self-driving car.
Gosh, this is so... I'm not touching it at all, and it's driving.
And this is the reality on the roads of the US and of Europe before you know it, probably 5 or 6 years away as a norm. Robotics. This is a company that Google bought. It's now trying to quietly get rid of it because it's kind of got bored. Boston Dynamics was making military robots. Now it's making humanoid robots to work in the warehouse to carry things for you. Although they seem to spend most of their time at Boston Dynamics teasing their robots. I wouldn't mess with this guy. So with all this going on, I'm kind of being bombarded with new ideas. The virtual reality world is the metaverse. There's bioengineering, stuff that's connected directly to our brains. Bear this in mind. And the exponential curve, you know, Gordon Moore's idea, the Moore's law curve, well, we've not reached the end of it. And yes, it's going to affect the tech world, the idea that something that was expensive becomes free. It's going to affect other worlds as well. And that is something that can change business realities before you know it. Because you don't always realize how close you are to this inflection point. Let's say it's 1994, when it's $1,000 per gig of storage. And I'd have said to you, I've got this idea for a business where we give away terabytes of storage. We'll be really rich. We'll call it Dropbox. That makes no sense then, but a few years later it does. And what's happening with Hardware is happening with genomics. It's happening with falling cost of sequencing DNA. This is a logarithmic scale. The green line is the falling cost of sequencing human DNA. Much steeper fall than the Moore's law curve. So again, what was 15 years ago $100 million is now a few $100s. That's going to affect healthcare. It's going to affect how the state tracks citizens. So when you're thinking about where the future's going, it's quite important not to be encumbered by today's norms, by the way that the money is coming into the corporate bank account every month. So let's go back to 1983 when this new gadget hit the market. It was quite big. It had celebrities as endorsers. But let's say you're the big incumbent that made its money through landlines. Okay, AT&T, millions of miles of copper cables. Now, their Bell Labs had done a lot of the IP work that led to the mobile telephone, but they didn't know whether to invest in it or to ignore it. So they called in the consultants. They called in McKinsey. And they said, so it's 1983 now. How many of these mobile telephone gadgets do you think there will be in America by the end of the century? 17 years away. McKinsey goes and does its number crunching, and they come up with a number. They say, well, we think it could be fairly significant. We think it could be almost 1 million mobile telephones, which wasn't a bad guess. It was slightly out. 3 things McKinsey got wrong that I think we all need to bear in mind when we're thinking of technologies. Number 1, Moore's law means that form factor is going to get much more useful before you realize it. 2, they thought about it as a technology rather than a human enabler. We don't adopt something, we don't change our behavior because of the number gigahertz or megabits. It's because it connects us to our loved ones, it enhances our identity, it simplifies our tasks. And the 3rd thing McKinsey got wrong was they framed their thinking according to the social norms of 1983, and those norms change quickly. In 1983, if you wanted to make a phone call, you would go back to the office, you would go and find that public phone, you would go home. Today, if you take this away from a 15-year-old for more than 6 seconds, it's a human rights abuse. You are going to be sent to The Hague. And I love just taking this as one example of how it's making us behave in an irrational way. You think you can predict human behavior. Look at your own behavior. There was a conversation thread on Reddit 2 years ago. Somebody asked if somebody from the 1950s suddenly appeared now, what would be the hardest thing to explain to them about modern life? And my favorite answer was, I have a device in my pocket that's capable of accessing the entirety of information known to man, and I use it to look at pictures of cats and to get into arguments with strangers. Be honest about your own irrational behavior. You know, we're now so addicted to apps that there are apps just to tell you how many times a day you're checking your apps. There are new medical conditions. This one is called the 3-dot anxiety. And we've also had to redraw Maslow's hierarchy of human needs because of this new device. But we're here to talk about business, so I want to talk about the irrational things this is doing to the way people are spending money. And I'm going, because we're in Vegas, I'm going to bring in Kim Kardashian, who a couple of years ago issued a free game, free iOS, Android game. You didn't have to pay to download it. You could pay a tiny bit of money inside the game to move more quickly. You were essentially living her lifestyle. In 5 months, this free game earned her $43 million, which, again, says that our assumptions about how people spend money are changing. So with all this as a kind of starting point, I'm going to give you 10 things I'm seeing in the startups from all over the world who are moving with these trends, who are creating this sense of innovation to move as quickly as people's changing behavior. And the first thing, I guess following on from some of the things Bob was saying, is they are accepting the impact of artificial intelligence in all kinds of business. So just an insight from this gentleman, whose name is Demis Hassabis, who runs a little business behind King's Cross Station in London called DeepMind, that's made the news a bit lately. They're trying to solve general artificial intelligence, not just the little translate, recognize pictures. General artificial intelligence is the big one. Can you train the machine to react like a human in any kind of circumstance? That's 30, 40-year project if you can make it work. So there's no short-term revenue, there's no products on the market. When I first went to see Demis about 3 years ago, he was very excited they'd finally taught the machine how to play Space Invaders. They'd not told it the rules. They just said, try and get the highest points, taking in the data input from the pixels. The first half hour, he said, it kept getting shot. About an hour later, it starts to know when to hide, when to shoot. But we left it on all night, he said. By the morning, it was the world's best ever Space Invader player. Now, this company with no product and no revenue was then bought by Google for quite a lot of money. I know it's only pounds, but in those days, it was about $600,000. And, you know, as Bob pointed out, then it went on to this game called Go, and this is the European champion, and beat the world champion. And this was a lot before anybody in the field, any expert said this was possible. So now the debate is not can they achieve general AI, but how quickly can they achieve general AI? And in the short term, we're starting to see various approaches to machine learning create new business opportunities. And just randomly, some of the companies I'm seeing, Orbital Insight, a startup takes satellite data, programs algorithms to analyze it, monitors parking lots, monitors the number of people, the number of cars at the Walmart, at the shopping mall, compares it with similar places, compares it with this time last week, last month, sells the data to investment funds so they can bet for or against the stock price. It's a new source of data. Sentient, the best funded AI company in the world, run by somebody I know called Antoine Blondeau, was telling me, well, it's very secretive, but they have a fund that is investing in public markets more effectively, he says, than professional investors. They're also working with e-commerce retailers like shoes.com to optimize your chance of buying something else at the point of sale. But then they're also working in hospitals. Patients come out of surgery, they're taking 30 or 40 data points and trying to spot early signs of the blood poisoning illness, sepsis. If you can spot that within half an hour, you can save lives. This is a company in New England, Berg, that's using AIs to design new kind of drugs, new kind of chemical combinations, and then testing before they get to that expensive clinical trial stage, whether this is worth investing in. Computer vision, how quickly is that moving? So there are now such advances that people are creating free open source programs that you can download to your computer, like this one called Neural Talk, which takes what it's seeing and uses words on the screen to detect and to explain. This is a guy walking through the streets of Amsterdam with his laptop open, and what's being seen by the camera in real time at the top of the screen is being described. And it's describing it pretty accurately, faster than I could actually repeat it myself. And this is now 2016, and this is free. And if you think about not just picture recognition, what about voice recognition? We're already at the stage where the early adopters are trusting this device passively to pick up any sound in their house, in their kitchen, and respond to it. We're going to have a lot more advances in the voice as the interface. And also, this is the year of the bot. We are getting lots of companies starting to experiment with very, very small lines of code, very simple AIs. This is the retailer H&M on an app called Kick, using algorithmic customer service, trying to optimize your chance of buying something. What about emotion? So this is another example. This is a company called Sitecore that's got cameras that recognize not just the demographics, but the facial expression. You can't see it because it's detailed, but this is real-time scanning of a crowd, not just the age, the gender profile, but also the degree of anger, the degree of sadness. There's another company that's been doing emotion recognition. This is the network knowing not just what we're saying, not just what we're thinking, but what we're feeling.
What if your devices could read your emotions and respond to them? Emotions is developing technology to do just that. Our industry-leading emotion-aware system will enable a revolution in device and application personalization. We're taking more pictures and videos than ever before. Imagine organizing this content by emotion, so your most memorable moments are easier to find.
That company was just bought by Apple a few weeks ago, so now they know what you're feeling. Although my favorite use case so far of face recognition is this company that sells to churches so that they can know who pretended to be in the congregation on Sunday but wasn't actually there. Isn't capitalism great? So another thing these entrepreneurs are doing, they see the opportunity to digitize things, industries that we hadn't really yet got around to digitizing. Geraldine here runs a company called Emulate that is digitizing human organs. The little chip here has a human liver on it, so that you can do early stage trials of medicines without yet dealing with the actual human. We're digitizing our DNA through consumer-facing services like 23andMe, which at some stage soon is going to hit critical mass, and at what stage is every baby going to have their DNA sequenced? Because it will be in their interest, in the public interest. I was in China a couple of weeks ago, where they're trying to digitize the whole process of retail, and it's a really ambitious project. They've got Hong Kong's richest man, Li Ka-shing, has combined with the Chinese post office that they have 1 million workers, and they've created a new joint venture to digitize what they hope will be 1 million village stores all across China. Most of China still lives in the villages. Why would they want to do this? Because previously people have been paying cash and getting the goods. Because China's leapt over that whole desktop computer revolution. Now everybody's got the mobile phone. And they see a massive opportunity. It's a very ambitious project to take small stores run by couples like this in a village near Hangzhou to know not just what the customers are buying in real time, partly to allow the brands to query the database. So if you're Chanel, you'll be able to say, I want to know what Dior customers are doing on a Tuesday afternoon in September in towns where the commuter distance to the nearest, or villages, the commuter distance to the nearest city is 2 to 2.5 hours. And then you can, through their mobile phone, give them a 30% discount on your own product. You can measure it in real time. It's a phenomenal ambition that countries in the West are only just waking up to. In fact, I also asked this couple what kind of working hours they do. So they have the son who lives upstairs, the one child who they're sending to college. They said, well, we start at 5:30 in the morning and we go on to midnight. And they smiled. I said, so how many days a week? 7. How many days a year? 365. This is what you're up against. Just another example from another part of the world of how you can use data to do interesting things. This is Ami on the left and Matan from a company in Tel Aviv called Windward, and they are tracking 200,000 ships on the sea using all sorts of data, satellite plus analytics, to plot where they're going. And this is a very quiet company that's doing very big things, selling to hedge funds, selling to intelligence agencies, because it can track if this country is loading up goods on this boat and it's not going where it said, it's putting a fake call sign up. If a boat is coming from Libya, meeting another boat that's coming from Italy, maybe there's weapons traveling. This is something you can only do by digitizing something like the seas, that we didn't have that connected ability to track what was going on. So these entrepreneurs are also, no matter where they're located, increasingly thinking of the world, not just as their market, but as the source of how they make their products. There's a company I know that's developing an AI to read what people are saying in videos, to make videos searchable at scale. It's called Muse. They were a San Francisco company. They've just moved to Lisbon because, well, everybody's connected, plus much cheaper developers in Lisbon, plus really good quality of life, plus some great universities. So, they're sitting in a flat building what could be a very big company. So Jeff Bezos hates the idea of big teams in one place doing things. He talks about the 2 pizza problem. If it takes more than the people that 2 pizzas can feed in one place to solve that problem, then you're doing it wrong. Because we've got, so many products, so many ways of manufacturing, 3D printing, not necessarily needing to be somewhere. There's even a company out of Phoenix, actually, that's making 3D printed cars called Local Motors, crowd designed, and then it 3D prints them. It's got bases in places like Berlin now, so you can locally make your product. These companies are also using the wider network. So we're at one of those revolutionary moments where we're moving from the power residing in a hierarchy to it being distributed on the network. And what that means you don't need a CEO of a big organization to decide what's going to happen. It took them 93 years to get 650,000 rooms, when the network, like this one, in a couple of years, 3 years, got more than 1 million rooms on the network. There's a company out of France, a ride-sharing company set up by these gentlemen called BlaBlaCar. It's like hitchhiking, but through the database, you pay a bit of gas money for long-distance city-to-city travel. They couldn't get meetings with investors. Who's going to want to share a car with a stranger? Now it's one of Europe's unicorn companies. It's happening in finance. So this is a guy called Matthias Kroner, who's one of the founders of a new bank in Europe, Fidor. Unlike most banks, they invite developers in to have hack days. They recruit 20% of their staff from their chat forums, their online chat forums. They see themselves as building a community. They put their code on GitHub. How many banks do this? It's worked. He's had an acquisition lately. And this is how he thinks.
We want to be the pirates of banking. Welcome. You are the pirates of banking. There is a need for new banking. As the Web 2.0 development showed us, there is a potential for new banking. I would say this is kind of a typical high street banker. You know, steering his old crappy bank through the wilderness and storm of this event.
He doesn't talk like my bank manager, but this is the new attitude. So, you know, in the old world, you'd need a factory in Shenzhen. In the new world, like this gentleman, you go onto Kickstarter, and other people provide your factory. In Eric's case, the Pebble Watch, $20 million came in because people loved the idea of a smartwatch a couple of years before Apple was talking about it. And that's not even getting into how the distributed crowd, well, it's not about a currency called Bitcoin and where it's spent. It's about the blockchain that allows you to do all sorts of things through that collected network, whether it's a land registry, whether it's ownership of precious goods. So one of the things that these entrepreneurs do is borrow from each other. You might call it stealing, but this is the new world. This is a guy called Lei Jun, based in Beijing. He runs a company called Xiaomi that's often been called as a copycat of Apple. His phones are much cheaper, but often look like Apple. This is what his store looks like. Do you recognize this? But what's really interesting is they're innovating by working with startups. They've invested money, small amounts of money, in about 60 startups to make accessories that then they use their supply chain, their 160 million customers in China, and they make the markup on these. They make no markup on the phones. The battery pack. This is now the best-selling battery pack in China. And Xiaomi, whilst it's had ups and downs with trying to stay the top supplier in China, it's been overtaken this year. They're doing it in such an ambitious way that we put them on the cover of British Wired. This is Lei Jun, with its time to copy China, because I think there's so many approaches to innovation there that we haven't yet thought about. Even big creative companies, this is Disney, they have an incubator where they take in startups and they learn from the startups. So there's a company called Sphero that made this ball that you can control with your phone. They decided, this is one of their companies, maybe we could make it a Star Wars branded ball. Without the startups, Disney would not have thought of that, however creative it is. One of the things I'm increasingly seeing, because a lot of these sectors are being commodified, is the mission-driven companies, the for-profit companies, but are still driven by a purpose, seem to have an edge. And just take the food sector. So I don't know if you've yet had one of Impossible's burgers. They're starting to roll them out. They taste like burgers, but they're made entirely out of fruit and vegetables. This is my friend Leslie, who's making cookies made out of those little creepy crawly things on the table. Crickets. You grind the crickets, you make high-protein flour. They're also making potato chips. It's startups that are starting to try and persuade us to change our behavior. But why shouldn't the established food companies that haven't been innovating in terms of health, in terms of nutritional value, why shouldn't they be challenged? Josh Tetrick in San Francisco, somebody I've got to know well, makes non-dairy versions of dairy products. This is the plant-based egg. No chickens were involved in the hatching of what are not eggs, which taste pretty good. And they are essentially non-food people. They're science people. They go into the lab, but they are on a mission to try and solve a big problem.
We started a company, Hampton Creek, that's based around answering this big question. What would it look like if we just started over? And we could ask it about a lot of things, but we decided to ask it about food.
So we did a cover story as well about people creating meaning-driven, purpose-driven for-profits, and it's growing. It's big companies like Unilever and Patagonia, as well as the small startups. And I think that helps your customers help perpetuate your story. Which links me to the idea that no business is an island, and the best ideas come when people with different backgrounds, different skill sets, different geographies get to share those ideas. And there's a local hero here in Vegas, Tony Hsieh, who helped build up Zappos into a billion-dollar company that Apple bought. If you go to his office in downtown Vegas, a few miles away, it's like a party. He's obsessed with creating conditions which bring people together. And the downtown bit of Vegas is not as shiny as this neighborhood. Low income. He's trying to reinvent it as a creative hub by spending $350 million of his own dollars, bringing in startups, creating cool cafes, creating nurseries, public theaters. And he's doing it to create what he calls a space where the 3 Cs can perpetuate. Collisions, different people's mindsets, co-learning and connectedness. And people like Tony Hsieh are influenced by this Burning Man phenomenon, bring 70, 80,000 people for a week to create a city in the desert. You get amazing creativity you wouldn't get elsewhere. Not just art, but I think you wouldn't have businesses like Airbnb were it not for that level of social experimentation, which is leading to new ways that we're working together. So there's a growth in co-working spaces. This is one in London called Second Home, where studios, but also space where you can meet other people. You have privacy in public. Big CEOs like Jeff Immelt of GE realize they're not going to do it all themselves, so they're partnering with that company that was making the 3D printed car, Local Motors, they've created a workspace called First Build in St. Louis, where anybody can come and prototype new products much more quickly and cheaply than the parent company, and if it's interesting, it's showing promise, they'll take it inside the company. In London, only this month, we're opening a huge new biomedical research centre next to King's Cross Station called the Crick Institute, where they've designed it with no walls on the inside, so the chemist will meet the architect, meet the data scientist, will meet the physicist. That is how you get new ideas. A couple more things that these innovation-led entrepreneurs do. They get rid of the friction. Jan Koum created a business that you all use. He's obsessed with keeping it as simple as possible. There was a post-it note on his desk that had been there for some years from his co-founder, reminding him, don't add things that stop people essentially communicating. This is the company that was bought by Facebook a couple of years ago for what was then quite a lot. How much did he spend in 3 years getting 500 million customers? How much did he spend on marketing plus advertising plus PR? A grand total of nothing. Because if you design for getting rid of friction, your customers will do your marketing. Although, when the BBC reported the sale of WhatsApp, they said it was because Mark Zuckerberg saw it as an incredibly valuable massaging service, which to me explained the economics a lot better. So there are products like this with, 500 million users. I would say that's a pretty good message to the advertising industry that people don't like your advertising. Don't sue them, thank them. There's this concept in design circles about the desire path, the path that no matter what you design for people to do, they will take, the shortcut. And I think every business needs to find its desire path, because there's a generation that is never going to do this, that doesn't want to do this, because they have gone to the button and magic has happened. And if you think about what companies like this are doing, when you get out of the car, how do you pay? You don't actually touch the button to pay. When you sign up, you don't even need to type in your credit card number. They've designed it so you scan it, the machine does all the work. These companies are also paranoid enough to protect for the security risks that we heard a bit about this morning. And I think this is going to keep accelerating, and we can't afford to be naive anymore when, Saudi Arabia's biggest energy company is compromised by a USB, when the self-driving cars that we are going to be sitting in, might not own them, might pay to access them, well,
from iPhones to websites to cars, Charlie Miller of Ledoux makes it his business to hack the computers that drive modern life.
Hey, hold on tight. Hold on. Oh.
Tuesday, he made a lot of commuters uncomfortable.
I can't see anything.
In this video report posted on Wired.com, Miller and his business partner showed how they can exploit the internet-connected infotainment system of a 2014 Jeep Cherokee to take control of the SUV.
And we're just at the beginning. But I will leave you with the smart entrepreneur puts a new layer around how they think about something. Now, I'm sure nobody here would love to run a quirky old bookshop in some of the most expensive real estate in London. This company that's been there since the 1930s, sells books to the royal palaces, reframed it. They thought, maybe we're not an expert in selling books as much as an expert in helping curate books. They now do bespoke book collections. They did one for a high net worth individual in a Swiss mountain chalet, 3,000 books, they charged £500,000. That's a really nicer way of framing. This guy, Josh Kushner in New York, made a lot of money through tech investments. He thought, why don't I take an industry I know nothing about, like health insurance that most people don't like, and put those tech design principles in place. So Oscar, he talks about it like it's a social network. He talks about user experience. Oscar comes from nowhere to become a significant player in health insurance. Why, in a commodified world of HD cameras, is this company so far ahead of rivals? Because it's selling not, we are a camera company, it's selling, well, we've reframed that. We are a company that you share your lifestyle video. You will share your image of skiing into an avalanche via your GoPro. That gives it an edge. Don't do this at home, by the way. And the classic example of the company that could have reframed but didn't, this is Stephen Sasson, 1975, holding his invention, the digital camera. Unfortunately, he worked for this company and it was inconvenient to their business model, so they buried it. 2012, company that once had 140,000 staff goes into bankruptcy, and this 13-person company is bought by Facebook for what was then a very cheap $1 billion. Kodak had the chance to reframe, because there was another film company at the same time that saw what was coming, and it thought, well, maybe the value we have is not the film we make, the developing that we offer. Maybe it's our knowledge about imaging. Fujifilm sets up a medical imaging unit. Maybe it's our understanding of light. They created a cosmetics unit. So I'm going to leave you with the certainty that unpredicted new tech is going to take the world by storm. It's going to change the norm. 2007, this new phone came out. It was very quaint. It had a headphone jack as well. There was a man running a company that was making smartphones who was asked on TV whether he saw this as a threat, and he laughed.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
How did that work out, Steve Ballmer of Microsoft? Thank you for listening.